Hello and welcome to Muse Jam Session Recording 189. My name is Dani Beaumont and I'm a Principal Product Manager on the Adobe Muse team. I'm actually traveling today. I'm up here in Seattle where many of the Muse engineers live and work. I'm joined by actually some of our engineers that are in Bangalore. We're expanding some of the Muse work that we do to some Bangalore engineers. I've worked on Bangalore projects in the past and I'm very excited to kind of join those teams together. We're going to focus today on the Muse 2017 subscription update that we pushed live at Adobe MAX last week. And towards the end of this session, actually, you can scrub to the end if you're looking at the recording, I'm going to actually give you some pointers from MAX. There's some excellent Muse content that was recorded at the event, and I want to kind of turn you on to that because there's just some really great pieces that you can watch if you weren't able to attend the event. So what I want to do is step through 8 of the features for this release of Adobe Muse. I will give you a little bit of context. When we were working on this release, probably one of the #1 requests we had from the community is to make the widgets that are built within Muse more responsive. So we put some time into focusing on the composition widget and the slideshow widget. And engineers did work, and we handed it over to the test engineers. What we found is that it really showed off a need to focus on performance on the design canvas to some extent. Because if you think about a composition widget, it's a trigger and a target. And let's go ahead and show some content so you're not looking at the same screen here. If I went to, this is an example of a slideshow, for example, that we're going through. And as you build out multiple breakpoints, a slideshow can have a previous, a next, a back button, it can have a counter, it can have a caption, and really setting all the rules around responsive design with that type of a widget, coupled with the fact that you can nest inside of a widget another widget, and the composition widget is often used in that powerful way. We stopped some of the work we were doing on that, and we did not release it with this version of the product. I also spent a couple weeks, probably 3 weeks, building out 2 different Muse websites as responsive design sites from scratch. And it was an excellent experience for me. It really allowed me to focus on performance issues and bugs that I was running into around responsive design. And the team went ahead and focused on that for this release. So a big part of what this release is about is a bit under the hood, and it has to do with bug fixes and performance. In the follow-on session, so for the rest of this year, I'm going to rotate through a lot of responsive design sessions. At MAX, we had a session on typography and responsive design. We also had tips and tricks for responsive design from some of our best Muse template and widget designers that were at MAX. My hypothesis is that's probably the best thing we can do with our time from a learning standpoint. I am in awe of how truly complicated designing for responsive design is, and when you couple that with familiarizing yourself with a tool like Muse, which is very powerful, there's a lot to cover there. So go ahead and throw into the chat if you'd like any topics that you would like to see between now and the end of the year. We've got, figure every other week I'll be doing these sessions. So there's plenty of time to do that, I think, and what you'd like to see those topics on. Let's go ahead and jump into the features that we do have with this release. So one of them has to do with Animate Files, or something known as OAM files. So to give just a quick bit of context here, see if I can stay full screen here and get where I need to go. If I go to the Wild Isles. So, yes. I'm going to jump over to the gear guide. This is probably the last demo asset that we produced in Adobe Muse that focused on scroll effects. And when we introduced responsive design, many of you know that that first release of responsive design, we turned off scroll effects for fluid breakpoints. In the release we delivered this summer, we have a lot of releases. This is release number 15, by the way, for the 2017 release. In the summer, we re-enabled scroll effects with fixed breakpoints. That's also an area of focus I want to play with in the coming weeks, is really show you how those two work together. But this was a page that showed off all sorts of scroll effects in action. And you can now achieve these on fixed breakpoints. But one of the scroll effects that we showed had to do with OAM files. So notice that I have a bird here. In this example, the OAM file is created using Edge Animate CC. And that application, actually I don't think it was a CC, but Edge Animate had animations that could be defined. In this example, the bird is basically moving on an animation path. And as I move forward, scrolling down the site, it's actually animating the bird at the speed of scroll. Another animation, if I slip down here towards lower on the page, you'll notice that when I get to a certain point, here on the right, there's going to be the appearance. So using scroll effects opacity, I allow you to have visibility around an ant. And there's the cute little ant there right to the right of my cursor. When I get to a certain point, it basically activates an OAM file that allows you to allow the animation to play. So unlike the bird above, that bird was moving at the speed of scroll. This ant is actually moving on its own loop in essence. So it's going to continue to move at its own pace, having nothing to do with scrolling. So I could trigger that animation. Edge Animate had a file format known as OAM, and Edge Animate was born basically because Flash was no longer really viable in many touch-enabled devices. So in order to emit a more popular web standard, HTML5 and CSS3, we created OAM files in Edge Animate. There was a decision made earlier this year to actually retire Edge Animate and instead look back to what was known as Flash Pro and evolve Flash Pro to actually support the generation of HTML5 and CSS3. So not the old world of Flash, but one where it's modern for modern browsers. We renamed Flash as, just to confuse everyone, Animate CC. And Animate CC is formerly known as Flash Pro. Animate CC also allows you to save out content as an OAM file. And this animation can now be placed in Muse. So actually, to correct that, we've supported the ability to say file place of an OAM. What we're doing is now supporting that workflow also in the Creative Cloud library. So to show this for a moment, if I come over into just a simple Muse document and I come in and open up a page, I'll double click on that page. I can come in and say file place, and I can browse to an OAM file. So here, let's see, I've got some pigeon assets that I've been playing with. And notice that I've got an Edge Animate CC, so an older instance here. I've got a big backpack that we generated there. And notice that when you save out the Edge Animate content, there is an Animate package folder that has an OAM file. If you are familiar with animations, if you want to use the old Edge Animate, there's no harm in that, although it's been discontinued. You can also go with Animate CC, the more modern version. You have the ability when you're designing out an object, content, a stage within the application to set that canvas as responsive in height and width. And that's a magical combination with Adobe Muse. So if I come in and place this big oak pack, notice that I can come in and press and drag it. Sorry, I just was in a bit of a rush here. One of the things I didn't do when I saved out this OAM is saved a poster image. So when you're saving out the file format, you can choose to have a poster image saved with it, which allows you to place content and see that content easily. This OAM does have a responsive canvas. So let me just show you this for a second, although we're seeing a whole lot of nothing. I'm sorry about that. Let's say I decided I wanted this object, this empty container, to have responsive design applied to it. So maybe I'll put it in the center here. And in the dropdown, because it was saved out as an OAM with that responsive canvas, I have the ability to select responsive width and height for the object, or to have it not be responsive, basically be fixed in its size. If I set that attribute, let's go in and kind of juice this up a little bit. Notice that it's now scaling. It's a fluid object. Perhaps I get to a particular breakpoint where I want to come in and add a breakpoint here and change that from being fluid to fixed. If I now pull down on File to preview the page in the browser, knowing that my first breakpoint there is set at about 960, I don't know if you guys hear birds, but I do, and there's no way to turn it off. So I'm going to get out of full screen here, and I'll grab the edge of the browser. When I get to that scalable breakpoint, notice that my OAM is scaling. And this is a very Are you hearing that noise? It's a real question. Maybe you don't hear it. I don't know that I'm sharing my computer audio, which is better. It's a pretty noisy file, but it's showing off that you can control sound and animations through different scenes here with the file. So this is support for OAMs, and that's the file place workflow. The other workflow you can work with is the ability to use Creative Cloud libraries. So if I come in and open up a CC library and root around a little bit here, I've got a few test files. Let's see. Let's see what I can come up with here. There's a whole lot of pigeon asset old going on here. Okay, so notice that I have now sort of buckets here. So in the Creative Cloud library, if I were in Edge Animate or Animate CC, and I wanted to add a project to my Creative Cloud library, you do that basically by selecting the object and then coming in and selecting the Add button in the Creative Cloud library, which adds the animation there to your project. From there in Adobe Muse, notice that we have new sections now. So in a Creative Cloud library, you can break out between colors, graphics, so PNG files, even GIF animations and such will come up in the graphics area. And then there's a video section here, but we now also have an animation section. And that's where the Animate Files will occur for you. So that's feature number one. Again, the event is that if you define things as responsive in the design canvas, save it into your Creative Cloud library, you can drag them onto the canvas in Muse and have that workflow supported. Next up on the magical mystery tour here, number 2. So form anti-spam support with reCAPTCHA version 2. I don't know if you have done context forms in the past, but there are different levels of spam support for contact forms. So let's go ahead and show this a little bit. I'll go into, let's just see. Let's go to our pigeon site. And on the third page, I have a contact form. We'll zoom out a bit, take a look at that. Going to hide chat for a moment. Feeling a little lonely today, though. It's always good to see the chat there. Okay, so this is a form, and the form is supporting Captcha v1. So the way the world works is if you are designing a contact form, don't ask me why, but evil people will use something known as a bot, and they might attack the form and send a swarm of contact form submissions to the hosting platform where you're hosting that form. There are a number of safeguards that can happen there. On the back end of the hosting platform, if we see many, many forms being submitted, so if they find a way to get around the website and just submit it to the back end, we will stop if there's more than 100 forms from the same IP address. And I'm just making up that number, but if there are many forms to the same IP address in a certain window of time, we will block those forms. So that's back-end spam support. On the front end, we have supported this Captcha technology. So this is Captcha v1. And if you go to, I can even jump out here real quick. So if we go to Google reCAPTCHA, helps if you spell it right. So there's a nice new space for it. It explains the new technology that's being used, but it's this idea of reCAPTCHA too. And the good part about it is once you, as a consumer of a website, once you prove you are not a robot through either identifying some text or images, you kind of don't have to jump through that hoop again. It sort of trusts that you are a human. So it's using a more advanced form of spam filtering. If you have built a site with Muse in the past and you used CAPTCHA 1 in that build, you don't have to worry about republishing your site. Google will no longer issue keys for reCAPTCHA 1. What they will do is issue a key for reCAPTCHA 2, and you can use that key. If you have an old key or a new key, you can use those keys towards the reCAPTCHA 2 world. Let me show you this a little bit more in action. So I have a form here, and when I click once on the form to select it, in the flyout panel, so with that first click, I have the ability to come in and select a CAPTCHA technique. In the dropdown, there is a few different choices. One is Business Catalyst CAPTCHA. And the idea there is that Adobe has our own hosting platforms called Business Catalyst, and that platform allows you to create trials. So if you're working and you want a URL to share with a client or a colleague, you're not ready to take the site live yet, so you don't mind that it has .businesscatalyst.com in the domain, you can easily create trials by selecting Publish here and selecting Business Catalyst as a destination. If you decide to take that trial site and pay to upgrade it on the Business Catalyst platform, you can apply Business Catalyst CAPTCHA for that particular form. If you're using a third-party hosting platform that you'll FTP content up to, you can choose from reCAPTCHA and reCAPTCHA 2. So right now I have reCAPTCHA 1 applied here. If I switch over to reCAPTCHA 2, you'll notice that a level deeper of controls come up. So the design is changed here. To be honest, Google allows you to style out the new reCAPTCHA a little bit less than the older version. So really controlling the way it looks. You have a few less options, but they're defined here in the options panel. If I click off to find that one more time, now that it's present, I'll click once to select the form, click a second time on the reCAPTCHA field, and then go to that flyout. You'll notice here I have a public and private key. What I do is go back to the Google here, and I can log in. I'm already logged in with my Muse identity. You'll notice I've applied reCAPTCHA a few times here. So if I came in and tried Kick a Pigeon, and you can give it a friendly name here. It doesn't have to be the URL. So if I said Kick a Pigeon, then the actual URL would be here. When I click on register, it allows me to basically create two keys. There's what's known as a private key, or the secret key, or the public key, the site key. I can come in and select that key and copy it on the clipboard, come back into Muse, and in the flyout, I have a cold, sorry. In the flyout under private key, I'll paste in that value. Public key, come in and paste it. The good news is that the reCAPTCHA 2 technique is much easier for humans to actually read and validate. It's not as difficult as looking at like a photograph of some numbers and letters on a sign and trying to guess at it. So it's a nice enhancement. Just to reemphasize, if you already have a site live and you're using reCAPTCHA 1, you can go get a new reCAPTCHA 2 key and use that new widget for that purpose, or you can just leave it alone. Google's not going to turn it off. They're just not going to issue any of the old keys at this point. Excellent. Cold going strong here. Pretty exciting. I'm blaming it on Adobe MAX. Okay, step number 3, form CSS for the send button. This may or may not have bothered you. You may not have noticed. I didn't really notice, but due to legacy issues, Adobe Muse, when we generate code, the responsibility that we take as a team is that if you design something on the canvas, we will make sure that what you're designing will behave pretty darn well on everything from a very old browser like Internet Explorer to very modern day browsers like Chrome and Safari and Firefox and such. When we did that work, when we built out the contact form originally, the send button that we used, so let's go back to that form. This send button was being generated as a bitmap. So it was possible that it would look fuzzy in the browser. We heard from users that they found it to be fuzzy looking in the browser because it was an image. It was resolution dependent. What we've done is worked on that area of the tool, and we now render CSS for the rounded corners, the color, the word send, the typeface that we're rendering in. So it remains resolution independent, will load very quickly. Again, unless you noticed fuzzy buttons in the past, it probably didn't bother you. But if you just open up Muse, I highly recommend always that you open up Muse with a new build, publish it to a Business Catalyst trial, test everything in the browser, make sure it's all behaving quite well, and then go ahead and republish your site. The web is an open standard. It's a moving target. And things change. We don't always mention in the release notes every single enhancement that we make to the code that we're generating based on the web standards that are out there. So as long as when you test a site, if you're in there and don't mind updating a site, go ahead and render it as a trial at Business Catalyst, make sure it's good, and then republish the site. So that will go in and automatically replace that send button as CSS rather than an image. Number 4, CSS file improvements around archive, retrieve, and comment. I am a big fan of Creative Cloud libraries. I find them to be really useful. I'm going to even jump ahead for a second. Yeah, we've got the library follow feature and then file improvements. Cloud features in Adobe Muse can be a little cloudy or difficult to see clearly, I suppose is a good way to put it. When you work in Adobe Muse, there are libraries. And as you probably know, there's the main built-in library. And this library allows you to easily download widgets from the widget directory, let's say, and have access to those widgets. So Muse has the stock widget library, and then we have the library that you can come in and add additional widgets for. We're really migrating in many ways to the Creative Cloud library. This offers some real enhancements or advantages. So in your own mind, the widget library and the library, those could probably merge so that you had the default stock widgets here and then could add more. In my mind's eye, that's my recommendation. CC libraries are kind of similar, but a different world. Creative Cloud libraries have an extraordinary ability to allow you to copy content, to move content from one application like Illustrator and Photoshop into Muse. Also things like comp, or if you use color in the Gather app, a touch-enabled app, the fact that the library understands those many Adobe file formats and keeps track of them for you is really powerful. So if you're working in Illustrator, you have a number of artboards, you can save them all out in the Creative Cloud library and very quickly bring them into your project. And I've done some videos that talk through CC libraries quite a lot. The enhancements that we want to talk about here are a couple. So let's start with CC libraries first. So here I have a library, and let's say I wanted to share it with someone else. If I go to the menu here on the right, you'll notice I have the ability to collaborate or share a link. Sharing a link says, look, I've got a number of assets here. I want to share them with you. And I want to make sure that you can have them, but that you can't wreck them. So you cannot make changes to them. Traditionally, the way I would do that is to select Share Link, and it brings me into the browser where I can select a link and invite you to join me, basically. That link can be very general. You can share with many people. You don't have to know who is getting it. You don't have to have their email. As long as they have an Adobe ID, they can access the content. The problem with that is if I realize I made a mistake in my library and I change one of the elements that's there, I add files or remove files, you're not going to receive that update. You just have this sort of snapshot instance of the library. The enhancement now is if I come in and select Share Link, as though I want to share it with you, it's going to log me into the browser. Go ahead and bring back tabs. I find it disconcerting when websites don't have tabs. So I want to share that link. And notice that I have the ability to toggle the public link. So I may share it with 50 people on Tuesday and then be done with it and decide I don't want to share it on Friday. I can toggle that link to private once I've set it to public. But as a public link, notice we now have some additional options. I can say that you cannot save the file, which means that you can open up that library in your own application. You can drag objects onto the canvas. If you really got nothing else going on with your life, you could probably drag it into Muse, create a new library, and drag it out. But it won't have the original file format like Illustrator or Photoshop associated with the elements. It's going to all be new stuff. If you allow save, that does say that I can send you a link. You can do a save as, rename it, and take it further. So I can choose that. And allow follow is really powerful. That says that if I continue to iterate, you will receive those updates automatically. So following means that you're constantly getting the latest version of that library. All right, that's the send link behavior from within Adobe Muse out to the cloud. Now that we're out here in the cloud, you'll notice here's that Pigeon assets, folks that I've shared it with. I can see the different types of content that's here. I have the ability with that content to come in and archive it. So if I'm no longer using it on an active project, I can archive it. I can unarchive it after the fact. So bring it back if I'd like to. So those are new capabilities that the Creative Cloud files up there in the cloud have. So that does not directly come down into the CC library, but it is a cloud level feature. All right, hope you guys are having a good time out there. Let's see, number 5. We already did that, CC library follow. Number 6, Typekit market for third-party foundries. This one's pretty exciting. So, but depends on how you look at it. When you deal with typography in Muse, if I come here into the application and decide I want to work with a font, so I come on in and create a text box and I go to my text flyout panel, you'll notice in the drop-down, I have fonts that I'm working with. There's a section called Web Fonts, and right there at the top is the Add Web Fonts plus sign. If I click that, it allows me to work with web fonts. Web fonts are fundamentally deeply important. I'm going to show you at the end of this session a really amazing talk that was given at MAX that has to do with just typography on the web, especially in the world of responsive design. But it's really amazing to understand what you can and can't do around web design as a typographer. It's interesting to me because in the world of print, there were thousands and thousands of typefaces. When it comes to the web, there are quite a few limitations around typography with fonts. And that has to do with the fact that you're only as good as the browser that's rendering those fonts. So things like custom kerning pairs and ligatures like FI and FL ligatures, you may have a beautiful font that has support for that design capability, but the truth is web browsers probably don't consistently support ligatures, let's say, across all the browsers. So the capabilities for web fonts are more limited for sure on the web, but there are always designs that are trending or designs that your client may want. We offer 2 kinds of web libraries. There's Edge Web Fonts. This is a Google open source file format. It's what we delivered before we had a relationship with Typekit, before Adobe bought them. And there's I think they're probably up to about 600 open source fonts that you can use. Because you are a member of the Adobe Creative Cloud, you have an inherent Typekit library there, and you have access to 1,500 Typekit fonts. Now, each of these fonts, notice that it's actually 1,500 families. So it says down here that I've got 1,561 font families in the Typekit library here. Within that family, so for example, Filson Soft has 16 weights. So all of these are representing the families, and the weights are in addition to that. And as you design, you can download a family and choose of the 16 weights, maybe 2 that you use in your design. Muse is going to upload only the weights that you actually use in your project. So no need to fear that if you download this 16 font family that you'll have a heavy site. That's not necessarily true. The big epiphany was that Typekit created a relationship with other foundries, and on the typekit.com website, you can license designs from other foundries. So let's say you have a client and the client uses absolutely a particular typeface for their corporate identity, and it's not in the Typekit foundry. You've traditionally been able to go license that font, if possible, as a downloadable self-hosted font. That's not always true with the foundries, but you could download the WAF, I'm going to not attempt to come up with all those. So there's the true type format, and there are the web formats, WOT and a WAF, and I'm going to get myself in trouble. Basically, you can take a folder of those web-enabled fonts, self-host them, they're uploaded with the project and are served up as assets within that project. The new news is that Typekit has partnered with many different foundries, and instead of 1,500 families, you have access to 15,000 different families. What you would do is go to typekit.com, pay for those additional foundries to license them. Once you've done that, you can just come directly here in Muse, search for that web font, and it will be added to the Typekit family list here. So you'll see this number go up if you've actually licensed third-party fonts. Clear as mud, huh? I'm going to stop and check out chat to see if I'm going a little bit too fast. Chat looks pretty happy. Okay, thanks, Susanna. Let's go back to the web again. I'm glad you're happy. The least I can do is provide some happiness on a day like today. Okay. No politics. We cannot talk politics. Library items and CC libraries retain breakpoints. I love this feature. This is one of my faves. I'm going to check chat and see what I just missed. Ha ha. All right, keep laughing. That's all I have to say. Just keep laughing. Library items and CC libraries retain breakpoints. This is really fun. The more you work with responsive design, the more I think you are in awe of how complex responsive design can be. And again, it's an area of focus I've really enjoyed of late, really building out sites and understanding techniques that folks in the community are using and learning best practices around responsive design. One of my key takeaways or beliefs with responsive design is when you build out a site, taking the time on a piece of paper or a whiteboard to think about all of the design elements in a project and how they're going to behave with multiple breakpoints is invaluable. So if we look at just this particular page, you'll notice we've got a number of elements. There's a header area here. There's text in that headline. We've got a subhead. We've got a side-by-side column of text and a contact form that's by design set pretty narrowly. If I jump to another breakpoint, notice the change that happens to my text box here. I've consciously decided that at that second breakpoint, I'll still have a single column heading and a side-by-side layout here. And as I go to the smallest breakpoint, if I jump over there, there's my heading once again. Got a little container here. I'm going to take that away. So I got my heading, and then instead of two containers side by side, I've got them stacked on top of each other. And notice that I hid the contact form. I just decided that it probably would be inappropriate to fill in a contact form on a mobile device on that smallest breakpoint for a smartphone. So you can access the form on a tablet, access it on desktop, but not on the phone. When you put in all of this concerted effort to build out elements that work well across breakpoints, you can now really leverage that in a productive way. So let's say I have gone in and I've built out this form, and if you've ever dealt with forms in Muse, they're kind of a labor of love. There is so many states of form elements. If I click on this form for a moment and bring up the states panel, let's see. There you go. I kind of like the panel open all the time these days. Notice that with nothing selected on the form, I'm going to check chat real quick. Yes, it is a labor of love. My big takeaway too is if people have said, can I convert my static site to responsive? The answer is absolutely yes, but you better get some money to do it. If you're hired by a client to build out a site, let's say they give you $2,000 to build out the initial site, and you say to them, look, I'm going to do alternate layouts for you. You've got a phone layout and a desktop layout. And then you want to circle back now that Muse has responsive in its portfolio and make that a responsive site. It is not something that is as easy as you would think it would be. Your client's not going to really appreciate that you're building the whole site from scratch. Not so much because you have to start over, but every element has to have multiple breakpoints and really be thought through across multiple devices. So that's the real labor of love, if you ask me. If I click on this form once, notice in the states panel, instead of up, over, down, and active states, I have form states. So I can choose the real look of this item, normal state, submit state, if it was successful, and if there's an error. And then for each individual item, if I jump on in here, notice that there's a whole lot of states for each field. Is it in focus if I'm tabbing between the field? What if there's an error? How do I alert the user that something is required or something wasn't completed appropriately? So this all sort of comes together as part of this labor of love. And for kind of demonstration purposes, I'm going to come on in. I have the ability to tunnel into contact form elements and select across the tunnel, if that makes any sense. So I'll show this for a second. If I click off once to nothing, I click now on the form. Notice in the upper left-hand corner it says form. I'm going to click a second time where I get to the form field, which is the label and the enter field details. Click a third time, and I've delved all the way down into the text input area. If I decide I want to change the height of that input, or let's say the width of this object, it's going to be a lot of work for me to keep clicking and trying to affect every one of these fields. What I can do is right-click and select same input. That jumps across all of those containers to allow me to select the same in a very nested way. So I can now come in and drag the little triangle here, not the squares for each individual item, but drag the triangle and make this a larger form. So let's assume for a moment I decided this was a better experience for desktop. I can press the edge in my browser here and make sure I'm in pretty good shape. I'll probably jump out one more time and select this content and go ahead and pin it to the center so that when I drag down to that next breakpoint, nothing's wiggling and it gets narrower. I'm going to pin that second instance. So pinning is not persistent across breakpoints. You want to do that per breakpoint instance. I can come in and select that object and center it. Press and drag one more time until I get to that smallest breakpoint, maybe. Boom. And the form goes away in this case. Once you've done all that work and you decide you want to leverage this, those breakpoint layouts can now be supported in your Creative Cloud libraries. And there's a couple tricky ways you can do that. I'm going to go ahead and select this form in the largest breakpoint, and I'll right-click and select Copy. And let's say I jump on over and want to just add another page on the site. I can come in and double-click on that. Now notice what I've done here. I've got a master page. Let's go back for a moment. Notice that on this page, I've got little triangles or fangs, as we call it on the team. And those are indicating breakpoints that I've defined for my master page. Now, the rule with breakpoints is kind of two rules. When it comes to header and footer content, you'll usually want to add the breakpoints that support the class of devices. So navigation for a tablet, for example, versus a desktop or a smartphone. And if I jump out to my master here, you'll notice I've done that. I've got basically desktop at 1200, and I've got navigation here. I've kind of messed it up with that page I just added, but there's navigation that sits there for a mouse to click on. If I jump to tablet, I have what's known as a hamburger menu that drops down. It's a push menu that pushes the content, and I've got larger navigation that I can access easily on a tablet device. If I go to the smallest breakpoint, once again, I've got that drop down, but it's kind of tighter and really structured for a phone. So those are breakpoints I defined on my master page. If I come into the individual page and we jump out here, for this contact form, I went in and added more breakpoints. So I matched the 1200 and the 900 and the 480. They happen to be the same as the master. There's no reason why they would have to be. I could come in and say, you know what, I really want this one to be a bit larger, for example. So it can be different than what's on the master. That's fine. When you've done all of this enormous heavy lifting, if I come in and select anything, this could be anything on the page, could just be a block of text, could be a simple rectangle. But if I come in and select it and say copy, and I jump out to a new page, when I paste that content, I can right-click and select paste, which is just going to stick it, paste in place, which is going to place it in the same exact X and Y location as the page I'm taking it from. But we have this really cool other feature that says paste and create breakpoints. So keep your eye on the breakpoint bar there towards the top. When I select paste and create breakpoints, it goes in and does that for me. So here's my contact form. And in addition to the form, I now have all of the same breakpoints, 900, 602, 480, that was on the page before. So as I mentioned, this is a lazy person's way of simply copying breakpoints from one page to another. You can delete the object you've just pasted if all you really want are those breakpoints. They will be retained even when the object goes away. So that's tip number one. It's been true for a while, but I think people don't always know that that's there. Tip number two says that I can come into this contact form, and notice when I jump here to the 900 breakpoint, it does need to get moved up on the page, and engineering tells me there's a good reason for this that I've grown to believe, which is when you copy it, it remembers where it is in the hierarchy of the page, and when you paste it, you may basically have a much shorter or longer page, so those objects jump around a little bit. Let me get back on here and paste that one more time. With breakpoints, I think I hit undo there accidentally. So here I've got the form. I'm going to teach you another trick. I have the element selected on the canvas, and I want to keep moving it up to a certain location. I'm here on the 1200 breakpoint. If I hit Shift-Command-5 or Shift-Control-5 on a Windows machine, it's going to jump me to the next smallest breakpoint while keeping the object selected. So Shift-Command-5, there's my form. I'm going to just bring it up on the page so it's a bit higher and centered. Once again, Shift-Command-5, whoops, unless I don't hit the, I dragged it and I didn't stop dragging before I released the Shift key. So we got the first instance, Shift-Command-5, there's my second instance that I'm going to bring up on the page. And in the third instance, Shift-Command-5, it's just invisible, so it's not there. I could come into the Layers panel and look for the object. Notice here in the top nav, it's there, and it's just turned off. If I click this, it would show it up for me there. But it's remembering what I asked, which is that it copy it from another page and paste it with all those adjustments. The new capability is that I can come to the library, so just the plain old library. I've got a folder here called Dani Shuttle, and I've got tiles. I want to add the form now. So I'll come in and select that form. And in the library panel, I'm going to come in and add, actually I'm forgetting for a moment. If I right click, I can add to library. I only have one folder there, Dani Shuttle, so it's not going to ask me which folder I want to put it in. It's just going to put it in that one folder. And double click on Untitled, and I'll call this Pigeon Form and hit enter. All right, no big deal. I come on over, I go to a brand new page, and I want to grab that form. Then I come on in, Pigeon Form, zoom out a bit, and I press and drag it on the canvas. And there it is. But interestingly enough, it did not create breakpoints, and therefore it did not add to this page all of the layouts that I've defined. Instead of dragging it from the word Pigeon Form, I'm going to do this one more time, and I'm going to select Pigeon Form over here on the right, where we've given you an icon that drags the item with its breakpoints as well. So notice now I've dragged it into the footer area, which is always dangerous. Notice now my first guy might be a footer item. Let's see. Footer items can be so odd. Okay. When you don't know what's going on, I'll tell you that much. Get this guy down. The one I've just brought over, unlike the one towards the bottom, if I now hit Shift-Command-5 and go to the smaller breakpoint, notice that it has those breakpoint attributes. It's disappeared or it's hidden on the smallest breakpoint, unlike the first time I dragged where it just brought it over. All right, you got all of that? Through testing, I realized that Creative Cloud libraries come pretty close to the same feature set It's just kind of missing one critical thing that we're requesting that they add, because this is a shared library across products. That feature is if I want to grab this contact form. So let's go back out again. I'm going to select the responsive contact form. In the CC libraries, I'm going to add it as a graphic. Creative Cloud Library is going to go on in and save it there. I'm going to give it an intuitive name like Delete Me, because I don't want to keep it forever. If I select everything on the page here and delete it. So the caveat is, if you want to do this and you want to use Creative Cloud Libraries, you need to go in and make sure you define all of the breakpoints exactly the way you want them to be. Now, in that first case, remember how I said copy paste with breakpoints? That's a great way to just create a rectangle and bring it over and match the breakpoints between the two pages. So the caveat with CC Libraries is it's not going to create breakpoints for you. But what it will do is allow you to drag objects out. So if I bring Delete Me out here and I click and release to place it on the canvas, it comes over and it supports or it remembers any of the layout changes I made per breakpoint. So really nice productivity feature that I think is really worth exploring. Excellent. We're up to number 8, performance improvements and bug fixes. Not a lot I can show you right there, but definitely content that I think is terrific. So the last thing I want to do is, if you did not come to Adobe MAX, I want to encourage you to check out some content that was there. We had 15 presentations. I presented 3 labs, basically full day training and then some shorter responsive labs. But I had 7 folks from the community that also presented. I'll show you a kind of a list I'm working on right now of all things Muse from that time. Let's see. And these are Dreamweaver bits. I was kind of calculating that as well. But in the area of Muse, there were some terrific sessions that were there. One is around typography by Aaron Lawrence from Pivotal Labs. Another one by Aaron Lawrence and a colleague of his was on click-through mockups and how to really use Muse as a rapid prototyping mockup tool to iterate and get sign-off and validation from your customers before you even hand it over to a hand coder or developers on your team. These are really terrific sessions. If you want to access these sessions, what you want to do is go to Adobe MAX. I'm going to cheat and just use my little link here for a second. So, for example, session presentation. I'm going to jump there. And I am going to show you how to get here on the MAX website. So if I go to Adobe MAX 2016, I don't know how long these will be there. They may be there forever, but I don't think they stay forever. So under Adobe MAX, search for MAX Online. And what you'll notice here under Sessions gets you the same place. If you click on down to Web App and Design, there are a number of sessions here. The typography session that I think is so terrific is here. If I go to Sessions and Typography, or with typography, and I'm going to put this into the chat. We are almost done. And I'm going to open the floor to questions. Aaron Lawrence has done this in the past. It's got a ton of content. What he's done is revised it for this year's Max. Actually, this is a good one. It's not the one I want. The one that I do want. So this one is amazing. This is a celebration of Typekit. This is Kids Don't Try This at Home, where he's taken hundreds of Typekit typefaces and loading it onto a single page just to show off how amazingly fast it does load, even if you have many, many fonts. Where you do want to go is moments with typography. And I'll give you that URL as well. And in Moments with Typography, if you scroll on down, there are some fantastic examples of responsive design best practices. He talks a lot about H1s, body kecks, H2s. He plays with responsive design, so using stock Adobe Muse, no funny widgets whatsoever, I can come in and create effects like the overlap squeeze effect here, or come on in. Some of this I'm not even sure what he's got going on. So you have this nice layering underneath the object. Just really fun ways to play with typography. I'm going to tease you with this, and in a jam session in a couple weeks, probably 3 or 4 weeks from now, I'm going to have Aaron Lawrence join us and ask him to show off how he built this in Adobe Muse and give you the source Muse file so that you can play with it yourself. So there's a teaser going forward. In the meantime, just viewing it, if you're familiar with Muse, I noticed we had a few Muse rock stars with us today. You probably know how to achieve some of these effects. Just seeing the ideas that Aaron came up with, I think, is fantastic. All right, people, that's a little bit of a lot on a very tired morning after a very late night. But I'd like to open up the floor to any questions that anybody has. There's a Q&A pod here, too, that's looking pretty busy. Okay, let me go ahead and check. Uh-oh, there's a lot going on. What is the share button for? Thank you for asking that. The share button is kind of very simple. I should respect it more than I do. But if I come into a project that I have already published, when I hit share, let's see if I go to one that I have already published here. Let's try this guy. So if you do publish it up, when you do so, the share button becomes enabled. It's a really easy way to copy the URL for the site you've just published, or copy an in-browser editing link for the site that you've published to share with other people. So it's just kind of really leveling up awareness that once you create a trial, you can share it with other people. So it will enable if I create a trial on Adobe Business Catalyst or publish up to an FTP hosting platform. Will Muse and browser editing be improved where it becomes a bona fide CMS? You know, it won't. And I'll tell you why. Because we went that way. Business Catalyst was acquired by Adobe 7 or 8 years ago with the promise or fantasy that Muse would drive to Business Catalyst and that one CMS would make everyone happy. And what happened is there's a problem, and that's that the customer is always right. And when the customer is always right, the right answer is what their answer is. So what I would suggest is, instead of standardizing on a single CMS, we put effort into extending Muse by way of the widget directory. And depending on what you're looking to do, chances are you can build out a CMS with Muse as a companion to many systems that are out there. So there are a number of vendors that will build out. You can use something called Muse Express, which is from some folks called Muse Gain down in Italy. That will create a full WordPress. You can basically build out a Muse site and then instantiate a WordPress server instance and have at it. You've got a CMS. There's also something called Publix, Publix, from some folks in New York City. Cookie, Cookie, which is Ali Pordelli, also has a CMS solution that you can use that will build out the back end. These enable some of the CMS features that are out there. I prefer that we remain agnostic and work with folks that want to extend Muse's functionality. Having said all of that, another thing that's new and really interesting to check out, I haven't even had a chance since Max. If you go to musethemes.com, I'm going to see if I can get lucky here. They are experimenting with a very thin, very interesting CMS. And I wonder if I can get here. I'm not sure what they're calling it other than it's something they freshly released. What it does, you can send me an email, Dani@adobe.com. Don't spam me, but I will dig it up and I will show you. What it allows you to do is use Google Sheets as a flat file database. So let's say you have a client that wants to update content on the site. They tie widgets to Google Sheets so that your small business owner can go in and just update Sheets and it will update the instance on the site. Pretty amazing way to have a very flat, very thin CMS that works with a lot of these small business owners. So check that out. Give me feedback if you've given it a try and have thoughts. I see chat coming up here. The Kinect widgets are right here. Am I staring at it? Okay. Again, I haven't had a chance to work with it yet, so I'm probably staring at it, but I believe you. Definitely check it out. I've heard really good things from Max and users that are playing around with it. I'm not seeing the Edge Animate files when I view the page in Microsoft Edge. What is Microsoft Edge? Is that a browser? I'm not familiar with it. Once again, you can send me an email, Corey, if you'd like, and I will chase it down for you, but I'm not familiar with Microsoft Edge. Okay. Gia's going to ask a question. I'm going to read it for a second. I think I found out what Microsoft Edge is. A Windows 10 new browser. Yes, it might be a bug. If you can, I'm feeling communicative today. Send me an email. I'm happy to forward it on to folks to see if it's a Muse issue or if it has to do with the Edge Animate or the Animate CC products. But I will check around if you send me an email and kind of communicate what the issue is, which is that it's not showing up. But show me a page that's got it. Maybe point me to a Muse source file that has it in action. Makes proving or digging into the bug a little easier. All right, I was going to read Gio's long ask. Hold on one second. It's a really good question, and it's sometimes a confusing answer. Let me see if I can explain it in the simplest way possible. Okay, here we go. There's a couple ways you can place images in Muse, right? If I come to this pigeon site and I decide instead of a little gray background here, I want to fill with an image, and I go ahead and find something that won't embarrass me. Doesn't really matter. This is kind of small, but it's okay. And I say here, notice that, okay, so I just create a background image. I don't have to keep the fill color. We can get rid of it. And I've placed the image in this container. And the difference here is if I take an image and I just say file place, when I do that, let me just kind of show this really quick. We're at time, but I'm okay if you're okay. I can come in and resize a placed image. So I said file place and I place this image. I can come in and hold a modifier key or go grab the crop tool there and I can crop this image. I can double click and it's masked and I can move it around. So it has, and honestly, this is a little bit of Muse, but it's mostly the way the web looks at images. This is the behavior for a placed image. If instead I want a behavior such that as the width of the browser gets greater, there's a fill or an image in the background that I can work with. What I can do is create a container. So this is a rectangle. I can fill the rectangle with an image. I can come in. I know this wasn't exactly your question, Gio, but I want to make sure everybody's with us here. And in the fitting, I can say, go ahead and scale to fill the container. And when I preview this now in the browser, what will happen is the images that are placed on the canvas, they're just going to remain placed. They may be scale, height, and width. In fact, I think these guys are. If I give this a second to load. Okay, so I've got my page here. Notice I've got images here. I forget how this is designed, but notice as it gets smaller, those squares are getting smaller. So they're set to scale, height, and width, as you would expect. The content below here is set to fill the container. And the truth is, given the way I've designed this, if I fake a bigger monitor, which may confuse you, if I zoom out, so if I hit Command minus a lot, it's simulating a really huge monitor, right? Imagine, see how small the text is? No matter how big this monitor is, it could be a 60-inch monitor. That image is going to always go full width. Now there's a way to stop that. Notice these arrows here. If I say fix the width of it to 1200 or less, and once again I preview it in the browser, what will happen to that image is it will stop. It will box out, in essence, at 1200. It won't get any larger beyond 1200, but anything from 1200 or less. So remember, I faked this guy out, and this may not listen to me, depending on the demo gods. All right, I might have to fiddle with it a little more, but I can come in and have it be fixed and then reduce for anything smaller than that. When you work in Muse, if I said to these little rectangles here, when you're on a phone layout, go ahead and place them for me right here at a certain size. And when you're at a 1200 DPI or 1200 pixel width, go ahead and place them at a certain size. You're right. Muse is going to come in and it's going to subsample the image. It's going to, if I've set it as high DPI, it might do 144 DPI. If it's standard, it's going to do 72. But it's going to subsample this image and optimize it for this device. If I instead fill a container with an image, and I go to the phone layout, and I've got that lovely fill container here, we don't know how big this will be. We can't determine if you're going to stretch it all the way to a 60-inch monitor or not. So we do not subsample fill images for that reason, because we're not certain what its intent will be. If you're concerned that you've got a fill image on a phone layout, what I would do is come on in and, as you say, make it smaller, place it on the phone layout, and then come on in and say, hide it in all other breakpoints, but make it visible in my smallest breakpoint. Then I would go to the other breakpoints, place it again, but have that placed instance be a higher resolution. Does that answer your question? I think it predominantly does. So in summary, if you are worried about load time on some smaller devices like a smartphone, if you have it set to just file place, if you're just placing and cropping the image and scaling it, you don't really have to worry too much about resolution. If you're scaling to fill, it may have heavy load time. And you may want to go ahead and create two images, hiding and showing them on the appropriate breakpoint for the appropriate device. Good. I'm glad you're happy. Is Muse in the feature compatible with Adobe XD in the future? I assume you mean. Maybe. Maybe we're looking at meaningful workflows from XD into Muse or vice versa. Nothing to really talk about. XD is still in public beta, actually. So if you are curious about that, it's a good idea to join that public beta and keep an eye on the work that they're doing there. They're well funded with resources, engineers and product managers and such. It's kind of an exciting growth area. So I would say maybe it could happen. Nothing to announce at this point. Okay, people, you have used a little more than an hour of your good time. I'm going to do this session again, pretty much the same session, a week from now. And 2 weeks from now, or maybe probably 3 weeks from now, because I'm getting out of my cadence, I'm going to start to dive into more responsive design concepts and some of the Max sessions like typography and click-through mockups that I'd like to share with you. So Q&A seems it's got a little bit more. You're welcome, Dani. Okay, folks, thank you so much for your time. I will do very good and be very well, and I ask all of you to do the same. It's a good time to appreciate what we have and be very kind to one another. That's my ask of you. Okay, we'll catch you next week or 3 weeks from now.